Hi, I want to talk a little bit about Plato today. Plato was the student of Socrates and the teacher of Aristotle. And he is absolutely central to the understanding of the Western philosophical tradition. In fact, he's so important that it's been said that all of the rest of Western philosophy is just footnotes in reference to the writings of Plato. And by footnotes, they mean in this case, sort of commentary on. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I'll talk a little bit more about Aristotle later, but today I want to focus on Plato's Metaphysics. Plato wrote a book called The Republic, in which he set out what he believed to be the conditions for the ideal state. Plato believed, first and foremost, in the illusory nature of the material world. He believed that the material world was false, was shadows, was a cheap copy of a sort of a higher plane that was filled with universal perfect forms. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In the Republic, Plato sets out that most people are like people that are born and live in a cave. And they're facing the back wall of the cave. And all they can see is shadows, these ephemeral kind of things. And they make their judgments about reality based on them, but they're not actually real. The material world for Plato isn't real. And the only way to understand reality is through reason. And not everybody had the mental ponies to pull the reason required to understand this world of pure reason, of pure form. And for that reason, he sets out the society, like I say, in the Republic, that is ruled by philosopher kings. Because philosophers, through reason, through attaining the truth, are able to see this world of perfection. Plato spells out this world of perfection in his theory of forms. I remember when I was an undergraduate at university being in a lecture where the professor, I almost said the philosopher, the professor was talking about the theory of forms, and he said something like, Plato believed that there was a realm of perfect forms that you couldn't see, and that they were mirrored on the earth, but the ones on the earth were a cheap copy. Okay, so people started to ask questions about that, and the professor said, for example, in the material plane we have chairs, but there exists in this universal realm of perfect forms the perfect chair. This was his example. So I found that kind of hard. I was thinking about what a perfect chair might look like. And then he went on to say, well, there might also be a perfect bed. A bed that was perfect in every way. Now I was in trouble because I'm thinking of some sort of universal IKEA where there's these perfect furnishings exist. I was kind of missing the point, but so was the professor. And then this guy in the back puts up his hand, I'll never forget it, and he says, does that mean that there's also a universal perfect donut? And the professor says, yes. And that was it. I mean, after that, I was done. I thought Plato was an idiot. How can anyone believe that? It didn't make sense to me. It was a big joke. I mean, does the perfect donut have sprinkles on it? Is it filled with cream or jam? Who can say? Is this the basis of Western philosophy? I think the professor was having a bad day. and I think he wanted to move on. And as a result, I didn't really get a true picture of this idea of perfect forms. But lately, I read something about it that I think encapsulates it pretty well, and I want to read it to you right now. It's from a book called The Cave and the Light, and if you're thinking that you'd like to go on in philosophy, I highly recommend it. The Cave and the Light. And this is a little section on Plato and universal forms. So the author says, I see a soccer ball lying in the grass and pick it up. I rub my hands over its bumpy black and white checkered surface. I breathe the smell of grass and plastic. This is what Plato called sensory awareness. Ecclesia in Greek, the lowest form of human knowledge. I toss the ball into the air and kick it to a friend. She kicks it back, and soon we are running and passing it back and forth. A game begins to see who can keep the ball moving without stopping. We have entered the realm of pistis, the full recognition of objects and accepted beliefs and judgments about them. Like, this must be a ball, and this must be a game. Or, in a different context, this must be money, because we all agree on the concept of money. And this must be justice, because a judge and jury says it's justice. As I run along, I spot another ball, a golf ball, also sitting in the grass. I stop to examine it. It's smaller than my soccer ball. It isn't black and white like the soccer ball. It exists to be hit with a club instead of a foot. Still, the two balls have a lot in common. I realize, starting with their shape. The game breaks off as I comb the meadow looking for other similar balls, baseballs, polo balls, beach balls. I go inside and start drawing diagrams of balls, both as spheres and then as circles. What do these spheres have in common? Then I ask, what would the perfect sphere look like? I pull out a ruler and compass. I begin tracing circles and measuring their diameter and their circumference. I split them into sections, first on paper and then in my mind. I'm in Plato's realm of Dionia, the realm of geometry and numbers. I continue to draw and calculate and watch as the shapes dissolve into lines, points, triangles, and parabolas. Finally, only the numbers are left. I realize they express mathematical formulae that exist in perfect proportion to each other, with each ratio, 1 to 2, 1 to 3, leading constantly to a higher and higher level of abstract order. And then I have it. This order and proportion is everywhere, eternal and unchanging. A single unity governs all things. I cut my last links to the sensory material world and contemplate that unity of which my original soccer ball is only a distant, dim shadow. A voice at my shoulder tells me gently, now at last you are in the realm of the real and the intelligible. I have achieved the highest form of knowledge. The voice tells me, and the vision of the good. This is true knowledge, episteme, Plato's realm of forms. I think that's a great explanation for it. I think my professor missed the point with the donut. It turns out that in the Republic, Plato talks about how he doesn't believe that pastries, because the ancient Greeks didn't have donuts, pastries were acceptable things. He didn't believe in scented oils or couches or art or music either, because he thought that they distracted people from spending their time on understanding this higher order of knowledge. He thought that they were just enticing shadows that kept us focused on the material plane. I remember reading that Plato, who set up the first school, the academy, had carved over the doorway, "Let none enter who have not first studied mathematics." And I thought that was a weird prerequisite. But then I used to think of mathematics as a painful series of formula that you had to solve in order to arrive at some sort of arbitrary number. Not like Plato, as a math, as a language for problem solving and understanding things. And I think that's a much more interesting way to think of it. And I think this will come up again later when we start talking about the relationship between philosophy and science. But it does beg a question that's better than the donut question, the universal donut. And that question is, does math exist outside of human understanding? Is math the universal truth? Would 2 + 2 still equal 4 if there were no people to write that equation down?